They scanned a human dreadnought and immediately regretted. It Part 1. The encounter, the stars bent and twisted as the Zephyrian war fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. 20 massive warships appeared in perfect formation, their dark hulls gleaming with weapons that had conquered 100 worlds. At the center of the fleet, Admiral Kethvara stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Terror's Edge, watching the human solar system spread out before him on the main screen. "Another primitive world to add to our empire," he said to his crew, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never lost a battle. "Look at this pathetic system. They haven't even colonized their outer planets properly." His tactical officer, Sub-Commander Grex, worked at his console, running the first scans of Earth's defenses. "Sir, I'm detecting several orbital stations around their homeworld. Energy signatures are weak. They appear to use basic fusion reactors." Kethvara laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the bridge. "Fusion? How quaint. We were using antimatter drives when my grandfather was still in diapers." He walked closer to the main screen, studying the blue and green planet that hung in space like a jewel. "What about their ships? Surely they have some kind of fleet." "Scanning now, Admiral," Grex replied, his fingers dancing over his controls. "I'm picking up several vessels in orbit. They appear to be chemical propulsion-based. That can't be right." "Chemical propulsion?" Kethvara couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You mean they're still burning fuel like ancient rockets?" "It appears so, sir. Wait." Grex paused, looking at his screen with confusion. "I'm detecting something larger, much larger. It's positioned near the gas giant they call Jupiter, the Main screen shifted, showing a distant view of Jupiter and its moons. At first, Kethvara saw nothing unusual. Then his sensors officer, Velthar, enhanced the image, and a massive shape appeared on screen. "By the void," whispered Grex. "That thing is huge." The human ship was indeed massive, easily the size of 3 Zephyrian dreadnoughts put together. But what struck the bridge crew most was how wrong it looked. The hull was a patchwork of different metals and materials, as if someone had taken pieces from dozens of different ships and welded them together. Some sections were smooth and modern-looking, while others appeared ancient and battle-scarred. Strange protrusions jutted out at odd angles, and the whole thing looked like it might fall apart at any moment. "What in the name of the 7 hells is that supposed to be?" Kethvara asked, staring at the bizarre vessel. Velthar, the chief science officer, ran detailed scans on the strange ship. "Admiral, the humans appear to call it a dreadnought. The name translates roughly to fear nothing in their language." "Fear nothing?" Kethvara burst out laughing. "That pile of scrap metal fears nothing? It should fear a strong wind. Look at it, Velthar. Half the hull plating doesn't even match. They've probably built it out of garbage and spare parts." The bridge crew joined in his laughter. These humans were even more primitive than they had expected. Most species they encountered at least had proper shipbuilding techniques, even if their technology was outdated. But this ship looked like something a child might build from old toys. "Sir," Grex said, still chuckling, "should we even bother cataloging it as a threat? It looks like it might explode if we look at it too hard." No, Kethvara said, wiping tears from his eyes. "Let's give these humans credit where credit is due. They managed to get that flying junkyard into space. Somehow. That takes a certain kind of creativity." Velthar continued his scans, shaking his head in amazement. "Admiral, the energy readings from this ship are very strange. The power source appears to be, well, I'm not entirely sure what it is. The signature doesn't match anything in our databases." "Probably some kind of primitive reactor they've cobbled together," Kethvara dismissed. "These species always think they've invented something special when they're just putting old parts together in new ways." "Perhaps, sir, but the readings are quite unusual. The mass of the ship also seems inconsistent with its apparent size." Kethvara waved his hand dismissively. "Sensor ghosts, old friend. That patchwork hull is probably interfering with our scans. Don't overthink it. On the main screen, the human Dreadnought hung motionless in space, looking more like an abandoned space station than a warship. Its mismatched hull plates caught the light from Jupiter, creating an almost comical pattern of bright and dark spots across its surface. "Admiral," came a voice from the communication station. "We're receiving a transmission from the human homeworld. They're requesting we identify ourselves and state our intentions." "How polite of them," Kethvara said with a grin. "Are they using subspace communicators at least?" "No, sir. Basic radio waves. Very primitive." Kethvara shook his head in mock sadness. "Radio waves. Next you'll tell me they still use paper money and wheeled vehicles." He straightened his uniform and walked to his command chair. "Well, we might as well get this over with. Open a channel to Earth. Let's introduce ourselves properly." The communication officer nodded and opened the channel. Kethvara's voice boomed across space toward the small blue planet. "People of Earth, this is Admiral Kethvara of the Galactic Hegemony. You are now part of our empire. Surrender immediately, and your integration into our civilization will be swift and relatively painless. Resist, and we will be forced to take more direct measures." The reply came back several minutes later, delayed by the primitive radio transmission. A human voice, speaking in heavily accented galactic standard, responded, "This is Earth Defense Command. We do not recognize your authority over our system. Please leave immediately, or we will be forced to defend ourselves." The bridge erupted in laughter again. The idea of these primitive humans defending themselves against the mighty Zephyrian fleet was absurd. "Did you hear that?" Grek said between laughs. "They're going to defend themselves. With what? Chemical rockets and good intentions?" Kethvara smiled and opened the channel again. "Humans of Earth, you misunderstand your situation. We have 20 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy. You have... what? A few orbital platforms and that amusing sculpture you call a Dreadnought?" Another delay, then the human voice returned, somehow sounding calmer than before. "Admiral, you seem very confident in your assessment of our capabilities. Perhaps you should scan our Dreadnought more carefully before you make any final decisions." "Scan it more carefully?" Kethvara looked at Velthar with amusement. "Did you hear that? They want us to scan their precious junkyard more carefully. I suppose we should humor them before we start the invasion." Velthar nodded and turned back to his instruments. "Very well, Admiral. I'll run a full deep scan analysis of their Dreadnought, though I suspect all we'll find is more evidence of their primitive construction methods." "Take your time," Kethvara said, settling back in his command chair. "Let's give these humans a proper analysis of their fearsome warship. Maybe when they see how thoroughly we can scan their technology, they'll realize how outmatched they are." Velthar began inputting commands into his console, preparing for the most detailed scan the Zephyrian fleet could perform. "Initiating full spectrum analysis," he announced. "Deep structural scan, energy pattern analysis, life sign detection, technological assessment, the complete package." "Excellent," Kethvara said. "Let's see what secrets this human Dreadnought is hiding. I'm betting it's mostly empty space and rusted metal." The scanning beams reached out across space, penetrating deep into the strange human vessel. On his screen, Velthar watched as data began flowing in from the detailed scan. At first, everything seemed normal, just the expected readings from a large, oddly constructed ship. Then the first anomaly appeared on his screen. Velthar frowned, checking his instruments. That couldn't be right. He ran the scan again, but the results were the same. The mass readings were impossible. The ship registered as both much heavier and much lighter than it should be, as if parts of it existed in different gravitational states simultaneously. "Admiral," Velthar said slowly, "I'm getting some unusual readings." But Kethvara wasn't paying attention. He was still chuckling at the thought of these primitive humans trying to threaten his fleet with their cobbled-together excuse for a warship. The scan continued, diving deeper into the human dreadnought, and with each passing second, more impossible data flooded Velthar's instruments. Whatever this ship was, it definitely wasn't what it appeared to be. They scanned a human dreadnought, and immediately regretted it Part 2. The data anomaly. Velthar stared at his scanning console, his three eyes blinking in confusion. The data flowing from the human dreadnought made no sense at all. He checked his instruments twice, then 3 times, but the readings remained the same. "Admiral," he called out, his voice uncertain, "I think there's something wrong with our scanners." Kethvara was still laughing with his officers about the humans' pathetic defense fleet. "What's wrong now, Velthar? Did their junkyard ship break our equipment just by existing?" "Sir, the mass readings are impossible. The ship shows a mass of 12 million tons in some sections, but only 3,000 tons in others. The same sections scanned at the same time." The laughter on the bridge died down. Grex looked over at Velthar's station with interest. "That doesn't make sense. Are you sure you're calibrated correctly?" "I've run 3 full calibration checks," Velthar replied, frustrated. "The equipment is working perfectly. But look at this." He put the data on the main screen. "The ship's hull shows as solid metal here, empty space here, and something else entirely here. Something our computers can't even identify." Admiral Kethvara frowned and walked over to the science station. "Show me the energy readings." Velthar brought up another display. "This is even stranger, Admiral. The power output is, well, it's off our charts, but it's not coming from any single source. The energy seems to be distributed throughout the entire ship in patterns that don't follow any known engineering principles." "What do you mean, patterns?" Kethvara asked, his amusement starting to fade. "Watch this," Velthar said, highlighting different sections of the ship on the screen. "The energy flows like this, and this, and this. But those corridors don't connect to anything. According to our scans, they're isolated sections with no way to transfer power between them." Grex leaned over Velthar's shoulder to get a better look. "Maybe their engineering is just terrible? Humans might not understand efficient power distribution." "That's what I thought at first," Velthar said. "But look at the total energy output. It's more than our entire fleet produces combined. You can't generate that much power with terrible engineering." The bridge fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. Admiral Kethvara stared at the human dreadnought on the main screen. It still looked like a pile of scrap metal, but now that pile of scrap was somehow producing more energy than 20 advanced Zephyrian warships. "What about life signs?" Kethvara asked quietly. Velthar's face went pale. That's the most disturbing part, Admiral." He brought up a new display. "I'm detecting thousands of life signs aboard that ship." "Thousands?" Grex said. "How many thousands?" "I've stopped counting at 50,000, sir, and they're still coming." The number hit the bridge crew like a physical blow. 50,000 people on one ship was more than their entire fleet carried. But that wasn't the strangest part. "Admiral," Velthar continued, his voice shaking slightly, "the neural patterns are wrong. They don't match human brain scans from our databases. Some of them are far too complex for any known species, and some of them are old." "Old? What do you mean, old?" "I mean ancient, sir. The neural pathways show age patterns that suggest some of these beings have been thinking for centuries, but according to our intelligence, humans only live for about 80 standard years." Kethvara felt a chill run down his spine. "That's impossible. You must be reading the data wrong. I wish I was, Admiral, but look at this." Velthar isolated one particular life sign on the screen. This individual shows neural development consistent with over 300 years of active thought and memory formation. But they're definitely alive and active right now. The communications officer suddenly spoke up. "Admiral, I'm receiving multiple transmission attempts from the human ship." "Put them through," Kethvara ordered. "That's the problem, sir. There are too many of them. Hundreds of different signals on hundreds of different frequencies, and they're not all in human languages." Everyone on the bridge turned to stare at the communication station. "What do you mean, not all human languages?" Kethvara asked slowly. "I'm detecting transmissions in..." "Let me check. Velkari, Jungatar, Morthal, and dozens of other languages. Languages from species that have been extinct for generations." The bridge went dead silent. The Velkari had been destroyed by the hegemony over 200 years ago. The Jungtar were wiped out even longer ago. These were languages that existed only in historical archives. "Play one of them," Kethvara whispered. The communications officer selected a transmission and put it through the bridge speakers. A voice filled the air, speaking in perfect, clear Velkari. "Greetings, children of Zephyr. We remember your homeworld. We remember your songs. We remember when you were young and hopeful, before you learned to wage war among the stars." Admiral Kethvara stumbled backward. His grandfather had taught him fragments of Velkari when he was a child, calling it the language of poets. He understood just enough to know that the voice was speaking with perfect grammar and pronunciation, speaking a dead language as if it were alive. "How?" he whispered. "How is this possible?" More transmissions came through, each in a different, extinct language. Some welcomed the Zephyrians as old friends. Others spoke of sorrow for what their children had become. All of them spoke as if they had been waiting for this meeting for a very long time. Velthar's scans continued to reveal more impossible data. "Admiral, the ship's internal structure is changing." "Changing how?" "New corridors are appearing. Rooms that weren't there 5 minutes ago now show up on our scans. It's like the ship is growing from the inside." "Ships don't grow," Grek said weakly. "This one does," Velthar replied, "and the new sections don't follow normal physics. I'm detecting spaces that are larger inside than outside, rooms that exist in multiple locations simultaneously, corridors that loop back on themselves in impossible ways." On the main screen, the human Dreadnought hung in space exactly as before. From the outside, it looked completely unchanged. Still the same patchwork hull, still the same odd proportions, still looking like it might fall apart at any moment. But their scans were revealing something else entirely. "Sir," the tactical officer called out, "I'm also detecting something strange with our long-range sensors." "What now?" Kethvara asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. "The readings from the human ship are affecting our other scans. We're getting echoes from across the solar system, as if the ship exists in multiple places at once." Velthar looked up from his console with wide eyes. "Admiral, I think I understand what's happening. The ship isn't just in normal space. Parts of it exist in other dimensions, other layers of reality. That's why our scans are getting impossible readings." "Other dimensions?" Kethvara felt like his understanding of the universe was crumbling. "That's theoretical physics. No one has actually achieved dimensional engineering." "The humans have," Velthar said quietly. "Somehow, they've built a ship that exists in multiple realities at the same time. That's why the mass readings are inconsistent, why the energy patterns don't make sense, why the internal structure keeps changing." The communications officer looked up with terror in her eyes. "Admiral, I'm now detecting over 3,000 different languages in the transmissions from that ship, including some that our computers identify as pre-space flight, dialects from species we conquered before they ever left their home planets." The full implications of this began to sink in. The galactic hegemony had a long history of conquest, stretching back over 1,000 years. They had conquered hundreds of worlds, absorbed dozens of species, wiped out entire civilizations. And somehow, impossibly, all those dead voices were speaking from within the human Dreadnought. "Get me a direct line to that ship," Kethvara ordered. his voice hoarse. The communications officer worked at her controls. "Channel open, Admiral." "Human vessel," Kethvara said, trying to keep his voice steady. "This is Admiral Kethvara." What is your ship?" The reply came immediately, in perfect Zephyrian, spoken by a human voice that sounded calm and patient. "Admiral, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the human Dreadnought Eternal Vigil. You wanted to scan our ship. Are you satisfied with what you found?" "Captain Chen," Kethvara said slowly, "we're detecting impossible readings from your vessel. Thousands of life signs, extinct languages, dimensional anomalies. What are you?" There was a pause before Captain Chen replied. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that seemed to span centuries. "We are exactly what we appear to be, Admiral. We are human. But we are also much more than that. We carry the memories, the voices, the souls of everyone your empire has forgotten. And now that you've scanned us, now that you've looked deep into our ship, you can never claim ignorance again." The transmission ended, leaving the Zephyrian bridge in stunned silence. Outside, the human dreadnought continued to hang in space, looking like nothing more than a collection of scrap metal and spare parts. But now Admiral Kethvara knew that appearances could be very deceiving indeed. They scanned a human dreadnought and immediately regretted it. Part 3. The growing unease Admiral Kethvara stood frozen on his bridge, staring at the human dreadnought on the main screen. Captain Chen's words echoed in his mind. "We carry the memories, the voices, the souls of everyone your empire has forgotten." What did that mean? How could a ship carry souls? "Sir," Velthar called out from his science station, breaking the Admiral's thoughts. "The anomalies are getting stronger. The ship is definitely changing." "What kind of changes?" Kethvara asked, though part of him didn't want to know. "The internal structure is expanding. New sections appear every few minutes. But here's the strange part. The ship's external dimensions haven't changed at all. It's growing on the inside without getting bigger on the outside." Grex shook his head in disbelief. "That's impossible. You can't have more space inside something than outside." "Tell that to the humans," Velthar replied grimly. "Because their ship is doing exactly that. The internal volume is now 3 times larger than the external hull should allow." The communications officer looked up with pale skin. "Admiral, the number of transmission sources has doubled in the past hour. I'm now tracking over 6,000 different communication attempts from inside that ship." 6,000? Kethvara whispered. "How many beings are on that vessel?" "I've stopped trying to count, sir. Every time I think I have a number more, life signs appear. It's like the ship is waking up." On her console, the communications officer was frantically trying to organize the flood of transmissions. "Sir, I'm receiving messages in languages our computers have never seen before. Some appear to be from species that went extinct before we even developed space travel." Admiral Kethvara felt a cold fear growing in his stomach. The galactic hegemony was old, very old. They had been conquering worlds for over 1,000 years. In that time, they had encountered hundreds of different species. Some had joined the empire willingly. Others had resisted and been destroyed. It was the way of things. The strong survived. The weak perished. But what if the weak hadn't perished? "After all, play some of those ancient transmissions," Kethvara ordered. The communications officer selected one at random. A voice filled the bridge, speaking in a language that sounded like singing wind. "Children of the void, we knew you would come. We have waited in the spaces between spaces, in the memories that refuse to die. We are the Silvani, and we remember our crystal cities under the purple suns." Kethvara's blood turned to ice. The Sylvani had been destroyed 800 years ago, when his empire was still young and hungry. They had been peaceful beings, living in beautiful crystal cities, on a world with 2 purple suns. The hegemony had wanted their planet for its rare minerals. The Sylvani had refused to leave, so the hegemony had made the choice for them. Another transmission began, this time in a language that clicked and hummed. "We are the Cathara hive mind. We offered you our knowledge of biotechnology, and you took it by force. You scattered our unity and left us to die alone, separated from our brothers and sisters. But death was not the end. The humans found us in the darkness between thoughts." The Cathara. Kethavara remembered reading about them in historical archives. A species that shared a collective consciousness, destroyed because the hegemony feared their mental abilities. That had been 600 years ago. More voices joined in, creating a chorus of the dead. Species after species, civilization after civilization, all speaking from within the human dreadnought, all telling stories of how they had met the galactic hegemony and how they had died. "Turn it off," Kethavara whispered. "Sir, turn it off!" he shouted. The communications officer quickly silenced the transmissions, but the damage was done. Everyone on the bridge had heard the voices. Everyone knew what they meant. "Admiral," Velthar said quietly, "I'm detecting new energy patterns from the human ship. Something is definitely happening over there." On the main screen, the Eternal Vigil looked exactly the same as before, but Kethavara could now see it differently. That patchwork hull wasn't random scrap metal welded together. Each piece was from a different ship, from a different species, from a different world that no longer existed. The humans had built their Dreadnought from the remains of the dead. "Sir," the tactical officer called out, "I'm detecting movement within our own fleet." Kethavara spun around. "What kind of movement?" "Some of our crew members are leaving their posts. They're gathering in the observation lounges, looking toward the human ship. They're not responding to orders. This was getting worse by the minute. Get me reports from all ships in the fleet." Within minutes, similar reports came in from every vessel. Crew members across the Zephyrian fleet were abandoning their duties, drawn to look at the human dreadnought. Some were weeping, others were speaking in languages that their shipmates didn't recognize. "Admiral," came a voice from the Fleet Communications Channel, "this is Captain Mordan of the Swift Retribution. I need to report something disturbing. Some of my crew are remembering things." "Remembering what things?" Kethavara demanded. "Stories, sir. Old stories passed down through their families. Stories about species that helped us long ago before we became an empire. Stories about civilizations that offered us friendship and how we repaid that friendship." Kethavara closed his eyes. He knew what was happening. The voices from the human ship weren't just random transmissions. They were reaching out to the Zephyrian fleet, awakening memories that had been buried for generations. Memories of a time when his people had been different. "Velthar," he said quietly, "what's the current status of the human ship?" Velthar checked his instruments and his face went white. "Admiral, the ship is... I don't know how to describe this. It's getting more real." "What do you mean, more real?" "The dimensional signatures are stabilizing. Sections that existed only partially in our reality are becoming more solid. It's like the ship is choosing to exist more fully in our space." "Why would it do that?" "I think," Velthar said slowly, "it's preparing for something." As if summoned. By his words, Captain Chen's voice came through the communications system again. "Admiral Kethavara, this is Captain Chen. I believe your crew is beginning to remember things, old stories, old truths, old debts." "Captain Chen," Kethavara replied, his voice shaking. "What do you want from us?" "I don't want anything, Admiral. But the beings we carry with us, they have been waiting a very long time to speak with you. They have things to say about the empire you represent. things that need to be said. The dead don't speak, Kethavara said desperately. The dead speak very loudly, Admiral, when someone takes the time to listen. We listened. We heard their stories. We learned their names. We preserved their memories. And now, through us, they can speak again. On his science console, Velthar watched in amazement as the human ship's energy readings climbed higher and higher. Admiral, the power output is incredible now. It's like they're charging up for something massive. What kind of something? Kethavara asked, though he was afraid of the answer. I think, Velthar said quietly, they're preparing to show us something big. Across the Zephyrian fleet, more crew members were gathering at windows and viewports, all staring at the human dreadnought. Some were crying, others were whispering prayers in languages they didn't remember learning. A few were starting to speak, aloud, telling stories their grandparents had whispered to them as children, stories about the old days before the Empire became what it was. Admiral, the communications officer said with a trembling voice, I'm now detecting over 10,000 different transmission sources from the human ship, and sir, some of them are addressing specific members of our crew by name. By name? How is that possible? I don't know, sir. But listen to this. She played a brief transmission. Kethavara of the Northern Mountains, grandson of Velkara the poet, great-grandson of Jiena, who sang the sunrise songs. We knew your family, young Admiral. We knew them when they still believed in beauty. Admiral Kethavara staggered backward. His grandfather had indeed been a poet. His great-grandmother had been famous for her sunrise songs. But how could anyone on that human ship know such details about his family history? The answer was becoming terrifyingly clear. The human dreadnought didn't just carry the voices of the dead, it carried their memories, their knowledge, their connections to the living. It knew things that should have been forgotten centuries ago, and now it was preparing to share those memories with everyone. All ships, Kethavara whispered into his communicator, prepare for, I don't know what, but whatever these humans are, planning. It's about to happen. On the main screen, the Eternal Vigil hung in space, still looking like a patchwork of scrap metal. But now Kethavara could see the truth. It wasn't a ship at all. It was a monument. A living, breathing monument. To everyone his empire had destroyed, and it was about to show them exactly what that meant. They scanned a human dreadnought, and immediately regretted it. Part 4. The revelation. The space around the human dreadnought began to shimmer like water in sunlight. Admiral Kethavara watched in growing terror as reality itself seemed to bend. Around the Eternal Vigil, his science officer Velthar was shouting readings that made no sense, but Kethavara could barely hear him over the sound of his own heart pounding. Admiral, Velthar called out desperately, the dimensional barriers around their ship are collapsing. Whatever they're doing, it's affecting the fabric of space itself. On the main screen, the human dreadnought was no longer just a patchwork ship hanging in space. It was becoming something else entirely. The hull sections were shifting, rearranging themselves, and each piece was beginning to glow with a different colored light. But it wasn't random. Each glow corresponded to a different species, a different world, a different civilization. My God, whispered Grex from the tactical station. It's beautiful. And it was. Despite his terror, Kethavara had to admit that the ship was transforming into something magnificent. The mismatched hull pieces now formed intricate patterns, like a massive three-dimensional artwork floating in space. Each section told a story, represented a culture, honored a memory. Captain Chen's voice filled the bridge again, but now it wasn't just her voice. Other voices joined in, creating a chorus that spoke in perfect harmony. Admiral Kethavara, you asked what we are. We are the answer to a question your empire never thought to ask. What happens to those who refuse to be forgotten? The ships. Transformation continued, And now Kethvara could see new structures appearing around it. Not physical structures, but something else. Translucent buildings that seemed to be made of light and memory. Cities that had been destroyed centuries ago were rebuilding themselves in the space around the human dreadnought. "Those are the crystal cities of the Sylvani," breathed the communications officer. "I recognize them from historical archives." More cities appeared, each one different, each one representing a civilization that the galactic hegemony had destroyed. The living coral reefs of the Merthala floated in space like underwater gardens. The sky towers of the Aernathi stretched, up impossibly high, reaching toward distant stars. The geometric gardens of the Kthara spread out in perfect mathematical patterns. "How is this possible?" Kethvara whispered. Velthar's voice was full of wonder and fear. "Admiral, I think I understand now. The humans didn't just preserve the memories of these species. They preserved their entire reality frameworks, their ways of seeing the universe, their methods of existing, their fundamental relationship with space and time itself." The chorus of voices continued. "When you destroyed our bodies, we thought we were finished. When you burned our worlds, we believed we were gone forever. But the humans found us in the spaces between life and death. They offered us something your empire never could, a chance to continue existing." On his console, Velthar was frantically trying to process the readings from his instruments. "Admiral, the ship isn't just preserving these civilizations as memories, it's maintaining them as living, thinking, growing communities. They're still alive in there, still creating, still developing their cultures." The truth hit Kethvara like a physical blow. The human dreadnought wasn't a museum or a monument. It was a refuge, a sanctuary where destroyed civilizations could continue to exist and grow. The humans had somehow created a space where the dead could live again. "But why?" he called out to the ship. "Why did you save them? What do you gain from carrying our victims?" Captain Chen's voice answered, but now it carried the weight of thousands of other voices speaking through her. "We gain everything, Admiral. We gain their knowledge, their art, their wisdom, their perspectives on the universe. We gain the richness that comes from true diversity. We gain the strength that comes from unity without uniformity." Another voice joined in, speaking in the clicking language of the Cathara. "The humans found us dying alone, our hive mind shattered by your weapons. They showed us how to rebuild our connections, how to think together again while still maintaining our individual selves." A third voice, musical and flowing like the Sylvani. "They gave us new crystals to grow, new songs to sing, new light to capture and transform into beauty." More voices joined the chorus, each representing a different species, each telling how humanity had found them in their darkest moment and offered them hope. Kethvara looked around his bridge and saw his crew listening with growing horror and amazement. Many of them were crying openly now. Others were speaking quietly to each other, sharing family stories they had never told before. "Admiral," came a voice from across the fleet communication channel. It was Captain Morden again, but his voice was shaking. "Sir, my navigation officer just told me something incredible. His great-great-grandmother was Sylvani. She was rescued as a child when we destroyed their world. She married into a Zephyrian family and hid her heritage for her entire life." Similar reports began coming in from other ships. Crew members were discovering that they had alien ancestry, that their families had taken in refugees from destroyed worlds, that their bloodlines were not as pure Zephyrian as they had believed. "You see," the chorus from the human ship continued, "your empire never completely destroyed anyone. There were always survivors, always children who escaped, always families who hid their true heritage to protect themselves. The genetic memory is still there, buried deep, but never completely gone." Velthar looked up from his console with wonder in his eyes. "Admiral, the ship is broadcasting something on quantum frequencies. It's..." It's awakening dormant genetic. Memories in our crew. People are remembering things their ancestors experienced centuries ago. The space around the eternal vigil was now filled with the ghostly images of dozens of destroyed civilizations. But they weren't just images. They were real. Living communities existing in dimensions that overlapped with normal space. The humans had found a way to save not just individuals, but entire ways of life. "This is impossible," Kethavara said weakly. "You can't preserve entire civilizations. You can't bring back the dead." "We didn't bring back the dead," Captain Chen replied, gently. "We simply refuse to let them become truly dead. When your empire destroys a world, you destroy bodies and buildings. But thoughts, dreams, memories, love, these things exist in spaces you cannot reach with weapons." The revelation was overwhelming. The human Dreadnought was more than a ship. It was an entire universe of preserved civilizations, all coexisting in the same space through dimensional engineering that went far beyond anything the galactic hegemony had imagined possible. "But the real truth," the chorus continued, "is even more important than this. You scanned our ship because you wanted to understand our defenses. Now you know, we are not defended by weapons or shields. We are defended by memory itself. We are protected by the love and loyalty of everyone you thought you had destroyed." Around the fleet, more crew members were coming forward with family secrets. Stories of hidden heritage, of ancestors who had been refugees, of cultural traditions that had been practiced in secret for generations. The genetic memory awakening caused by the human ship was revealing that the pure Zephyrian Empire was actually a mixture of dozens of different species. "Admiral," Velthar said quietly, "I need to tell you something. I've been analyzing the genetic awakening patterns and I think I have Merthala ancestry, the coral reef builders. I can suddenly remember swimming in living cities beneath purple seas." Kethavara stared at his science officer, his friend, for over 20 years, and saw that Velthar's skin was indeed taking on a slightly bluish tint, a characteristic of the aquatic Merthala people. "How many of us are really pure Zephyrian?" Kethavara whispered. "Very few, I suspect," Velthar replied. "The Empire has been absorbing refugees and survivors for 1,000 years. We're all mixed heritage, all descendants of the species we thought we had destroyed." The human ship's chorus spoke again. "Now you understand, Admiral. You cannot destroy us because we are already part of you. The civilizations you thought you had wiped out live on in your own blood, in your own memories, in your own hearts. You have been carrying your victims with you all along." The truth was staggering. The galactic hegemony wasn't a pure Zephyrian empire that had conquered other species. It was a confused mixture of all the species it thought it had destroyed, carrying the genetic and cultural memory of its own victims. And now, faced with the human Dreadnought that had preserved those civilizations in their full glory, the Empire would have to confront what it had really been all along. "What do you want from us?" Kethavara asked, his voice barely a whisper. "We want you to remember," came the reply. "We want you to remember who you really are." They scanned a human Dreadnought and immediately regretted it. Part 5. The reckoning Admiral Kethavara sat in his command chair, staring at the transformed human Dreadnought with tears streaming down his face. Around him, his bridge crew was experiencing their own awakening. Velthar's skin had turned a deep blue-green, and he was speaking softly in the Merthala language, remembering songs from beneath alien seas. Grex was drawing geometric patterns in the air, his hands moving in the precise mathematical gestures of the Cathara hive mind. The communications officer looked up with golden eyes that hadn't been golden an hour ago. "Admiral, I'm receiving surrender requests from 17 ships in our fleet." "Surrender requests?" Kethavara asked weakly. "Not surrendering to the humans, sir. Surrendering to their own crews. The genetic awakening is causing crew rebellions. Across the fleet. People are discovering their true heritage and refusing to fight against civilizations they're descended from. Through the fleet communication channels, Kethvara could hear the chaos unfolding. Captain Mordan of the Swift Retribution was weeping as he spoke to his bridge crew in the clicking language of the Cathara. The weapons officer of the Iron Fist was singing Sylvani crystal songs that she somehow remembered perfectly. Across 20 ships, the crew members were remembering who they really were. "Admiral," Velthar said, his voice now carrying the flowing rhythm of the Mirthala. "I don't think we can continue this invasion. How can we destroy Earth when the humans have saved everyone we thought we had lost?" Captain Chen's voice came through the communication system, but now she was speaking directly to Kethvara. "Admiral, would you like to come aboard our ship? There are people here who would very much like to meet you." "People?" Kethvara asked. "Your grandfather, for one." The words hit Kethvara like a physical blow. "My grandfather died 30 years ago." Yes, he did. But before he died, he sent us a message, a quantum transmission containing his memories, his thoughts, his love for his grandson who had become something he didn't recognize. We preserved him, Admiral. We preserved his disappointment, his hope, and his desire to see you remember the poetry he taught you as a child. Kethvara's hands were shaking. His grandfather, Velkara the poet, had indeed died 30 years ago, but not before spending his final years trying to convince his grandson that the empire they served was wrong, that there had to be a better way to explore the galaxy. "He's really there?" Kethvara whispered. "He's here, and so are thousands of others. Your great-great-grandmother Jaina, who sang the sunrise songs. Your ancestor Morthek, who first welcomed the Sylvani refugees to Zephyr 300 years ago. They're all here, Admiral, waiting to remind you who your family really was before they became part of an empire." Around the fleet, the transformations were accelerating. Ships that had arrived as instruments of conquest were now becoming something else entirely. Crew members with awakened genetic memories were taking control from officers who still clung to the old ways. The rebellion wasn't violent. It was gentle, sad, and absolutely unstoppable. "Admiral," came a voice from the battlecruiser Voidhammer. "This is Commander Silthera. I've relieved Captain Drektos of command. My crew has remembered that we are 70% Aernathi descended, and we refuse to wage war against the Sky Builder's legacy." Similar reports came in from ship after ship. The Zephyrian war fleet was dissolving from within as its crew members discovered their true heritage and rejected the empire that had lied to them about their own identity. "Sir," the communications officer said, "I'm detecting massive energy buildups from the human ship. They're preparing to do something big." On the main screen, the Eternal Vigil was glowing brighter than ever. The ghostly cities of preserved civilizations were becoming more solid, more real, and something new was happening. Bridges of light were extending from the human ship toward the Zephyrian fleet. "Admiral," Velthar said with wonder in his voice, "they're not preparing to attack us. They're preparing to welcome us." Captain Chen's voice filled the bridge again. "Admiral Kethvara, we're extending docking bridges to any ship that wishes to come aboard. Your people have been separated from their true heritage for too long. It's time for them to come home." Across the fleet, the transformation was complete. Ship after ship began moving toward the human Dreadnought, their crews eager to reunite with the civilizations they had thought were lost forever. The Zephyrian war fleet that had arrived to conquer Earth was becoming a pilgrimage of the lost, returning home. "Admiral," Grek said, his voice now carrying the harmonic undertones of the Cathara hive mind, "I can feel my people calling to me. They're alive in there, all of them, still thinking together after all these centuries. I have to go to them." Kethvara nodded slowly. He understood. The genetic awakening had shown them all who they really were, and they could no longer pretend to be the conquerors they thought they had been. "Take us in," he ordered quietly. As the Terror's Edge approached the Eternal Vigil, Kethavara could see the docking bridges more clearly. They weren't just made of light, they were made of memories, experiences and connections spanning centuries. Walking across them would be like walking through the history his empire had tried to erase. "Admiral," Velthar said as they docked, "are you ready to meet your grandfather?" Kethavara stood up, straightening his uniform one last time. "I don't know if I'm ready, but I think it's time." The airlock opened and Kethavara stepped aboard the human Dreadnought. The first thing that struck him was how normal it looked inside. The corridors were clean and well-maintained, with artwork from dozens of different civilizations decorating the walls. It felt more like a university or a cultural center than a warship. Captain Chen was waiting for him, along with a small group of humans and beings from other species. She was younger than he had expected, but her eyes held the weight of centuries. "Welcome aboard the Eternal Vigil, Admiral," she said with a gentle smile. "Your grandfather is in the poetry gardens. He's been waiting for you." They walked through corridors that seemed to extend far beyond what the ship's external dimensions should have allowed. Kethavara passed rooms where the Sylvani were growing new crystal formations, workshops where the Cathara were developing new forms of collective thought, and laboratories where the Merthala were designing living coral cities. "How many of them are there?" he asked. "All of them," Captain Chen replied. "Everyone who was ever destroyed, everyone who ever wanted to live in peace, everyone who ever dreamed of a galaxy where different species could coexist. We carry them all." Finally, they reached a beautiful garden where crystalline trees grew in impossible spirals, their branches catching and reflecting light in patterns that seemed to contain entire poems. And there, sitting on a bench made of living coral, was a figure that Kethavara recognized instantly. "Grandfather," he whispered. "Velkhara?" The poet looked up and smiled. He appeared exactly as he had 30 years ago, but his eyes held all the wisdom he had gained since then. "Hello, Kethavara. I've been waiting to show you something." "What?" "The poetry you forgot you knew. The songs your empire tried to silence. The beauty that exists when beings choose cooperation over conquest." Kethavara fell to his knees beside the bench, tears flowing freely. "I'm sorry, Grandfather. I became everything you warned me against." "No, child," Velkhara said gently, placing a hand on his grandson's head. "You became what the Empire made you. But that's not who you really are. Would you like me to remind you?" Around them, the poetry gardens began to glow as other preserved beings gathered. Sylvani crystal singers, Merthala chorus swimmers, Ayernathi wind dancers, and hundreds of others from dozens of civilizations. All of them had been destroyed by the galactic hegemony. All of them had been saved by humanity. And all of them were ready to forgive. "The humans taught us something important," Velkhara said as the gathering grew. "They showed us that the best way to defeat an empire is not to destroy it, but to help it remember what it was before it became an empire. They helped us preserve not just our lives, but our capacity for forgiveness." Captain Chen stepped forward. "Admiral, your fleet is welcome to stay as long as they need. Many of your crew members will want to spend time reconnecting with their heritage. Others may choose to return to Zephyrian space to share what they've learned. The choice is yours." Kethavara looked around at the impossible garden, at his grandfather who had somehow survived death, at the civilizations that had been preserved in defiance of everything he thought he knew about the universe. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," Captain Chen said with a smile, "you help us write a new chapter. The humans have been guardians of the preserved civilizations for a long time, but we were never meant to be their only guardians. It's time for the galaxy to learn what we've learned, that the strength of a civilization isn't measured by what it can destroy, but by what it chooses to preserve." Outside, through the crystalline walls of the poetry gardens, Kethavara could see his fleet, Ship after ship was docking with the human dreadnought, their crews eager to rediscover their heritage and reconnect with their true history. The invasion of Earth was over. Not because it had been defeated, but because it had been transformed into something better, a homecoming for the lost, and the beginning of a new kind.